Within 2 hours, Karen's quiet suburban fortress had become a battleground. News vans lined Sycamore Drive like mechanical vultures. Protesters with homemade signs reading "Save Shadow" and "Karen is the real animal" crowded the community entrance. The Leopard, somehow already nicknamed by the internet mob, remained trapped 15 feet down in Karen's prized ornamental well. Karen stood in her living room, watching through designer blinds as her perfectly manicured world descended into chaos. Her phone buzzed incessantly, with calls from reporters, angry residents, and someone claiming to represent PEA. "This is exactly what I was trying to prevent," she muttered to her reflection in the hallway mirror. But her usual confidence wavered slightly. The Leopard's eyes, glimpsed briefly when she'd peered into the well, had looked almost human. A sharp knock interrupted her thoughts. Through the peephole, she saw Dr. Sarah Vance from Wild Sanctuary Rescue, flanked by 2 volunteers carrying equipment. Karen opened the door just wide enough to speak. "No permits, no entry. I've already explained this to 3 other rescue groups." "Mrs. Whitmore, I understand your concerns about protocol," Dr. Vance said calmly. "But this animal is dehydrated and possibly injured. Every hour we wait decreases its chances of survival. Then perhaps it shouldn't have trespassed on private property." The words sounded harsh even to Karen's ears, but she'd committed now. Behind Dr. Vance, she could see camera crews filming, their lenses trained on her front door like weapons. "You're going to let an innocent animal die because of paperwork?" one of the volunteers challenged. Karen's jaw tightened. "I'm going to protect this community from liability, insurance claims, and the circus you people have created. The animal control officer will handle this appropriately." But as she closed the door, Karen caught sight of her neighbor's 8-year-old daughter, Emma, holding a sign that read "Please save the kitty" in crayon. The child's tear-streaked face made something twist uncomfortably in Karen's chest. Her phone rang. The caller ID read Channel 7 News. "No comment," Karen snapped without answering. By afternoon, the situation had escalated beyond Karen's control. The animal control officer she'd called had arrived, taken one look at the media frenzy, and quietly suggested that perhaps a wildlife rescue would be better equipped for this situation. Traitor. Karen found herself effectively under siege in her own home. The rescue team had set up equipment just outside the HOA boundaries, technically not violating her jurisdiction, but close enough to monitor the Leopard's condition with long-range cameras and listening devices. The animal's condition was deteriorating. "Mrs. Whitmore," Dr. Vance called through a megaphone from the street. "The Leopard, Shadow, hasn't had water in over 6 hours. I'm asking you one last time to let us help." Karen pulled back her curtain slightly. The crowd had grown larger, but quieter. Even the protesters seemed subdued now, focused on the well where weak scratching sounds could occasionally be heard. For the first time in her 15-year reign as HOA president, Karen felt truly alone. Her phone buzzed with a text from her own daughter, Rachel, who lived across town. "Mom, I'm seeing you on the news. Please don't let that animal die. Some rules matter more than others." Karen stared at the message, her hands trembling slightly. Outside, the sun was beginning to set, and shadow sounds were growing fainter. Karen Whitmore was precisely 7 minutes into her morning meditation, the kind where she mentally redesigned her neighbor's unsightly mailboxes, when the screaming started. "Help! There's a leopard in the well." Karen's eyes snapped open, her perfectly arranged yoga mat suddenly forgotten. Through her pristine bay window, she watched her neighbor Janet sprint across the manicured lawn of Willowbrook Estates, her bathrobe flapping like a deranged bird. A leopard in her HOA. Karen's first thought wasn't concern for the animal's welfare, it was the property values. The second thought was worse: news vans, camera crews, her perfectly orchestrated community plastered across social media with hashtags like #WildlifeWillowbrook and #LeopardDrama. She grabbed her phone and speed dialed the HOA emergency hotline, which was actually just her own second phone, because Karen was the emergency hotline. "This is unacceptable," she muttered, watching more neighbors emerge from their homes. Article 4.7 clearly states no exotic pets without board approval. By the time Karen marched outside in her regulation beige cardigan, a crowd had gathered around the ornamental well at the community center. The well that Karen had personally commissioned, despite 3 board members arguing it was unnecessary and a safety hazard. Everyone stepped back. Karen commanded, shouldering through the crowd. "I'm the HOA president, and this situation is clearly a violation of multiple community guidelines." Dr. Martinez, the veterinarian from Maple Street, looked up from where he was peering into the well. "Karen, we need to call animal rescue immediately. The Leopard appears injured, and absolutely not." Karen's voice cut through the morning air like a perfectly sharpened HOA citation pen. "No outside services enter this community without proper permits, insurance documentation, and board approval. That process takes 14 business days minimum." 14 days? Janet shrieked. The poor thing could die. Karen straightened her shoulders. "The poor thing is an illegal resident. I'm calling animal control to have it removed and disposed of according to Municipal Code 47B. The crowd erupted in protests. But Karen had already turned away, her phone pressed to her ear. Behind her, the Leopard's weak growling echoed from the well, a sound that seemed to mock her carefully constructed morning routine. What Karen didn't notice was Mrs. Chen discreetly filming from behind her rose bushes, or the way young Tommy Rodriguez was already typing furiously on his phone. By the time Karen finished her call to animal control, #SaveTheWillowbrook Leopard was trending locally, and 3 wildlife rescue organizations were already mobilizing. Karen hung up with satisfaction, completely unaware that her perfect morning was about to become her worst nightmare. The Leopard's fate, and her own, hung in the balance. Night fell on Willowbrook Estates like a judgment. Karen stood at her kitchen window, nursing her 4th cup of coffee, and watching the rescue team's floodlights illuminate the well. The protesters had mostly gone home, but Dr. Vance and her volunteers remained, keeping vigil. They'd lowered a small camera into the well, and the live stream on Channel 7's website showed Shadow curled in a tight ball, barely moving. The Leopard was dying, and Karen knew it. Her doorbell rang at 11:47 p.m. This time, it wasn't reporters or rescue workers. It was her neighbors, all of them. Dr. Martinez, Janet, Mrs. Chen, the Rodriguez family, even grumpy old Mr. Peterson, who never attended HOA meetings. "Karen," Dr. Martinez said quietly when she opened the door, "we need to talk." They filed into her living room, the same room where Karen had held countless board meetings, issued dozens of violation notices, and defended the rigid order that kept their community perfect. "We've been thinking," Janet began, unusually composed, "about what makes a community worth protecting." Karen crossed her arms defensively. "Our property values speak for themselves. Our crime rates, our maintenance standards. But what about our humanity?" Mrs. Chen interrupted. "What about compassion?" Young Tommy Rodriguez, barely 16, looked directly at Karen. "My little sister drew that sign about saving the kitty. She asked me why the mean lady won't help. What am I supposed to tell her?" Karen felt something cracking inside her chest. "I was protecting all of you. The liability alone. We'll take responsibility," Dr. Martinez said firmly. "All of us. Whatever legal issues arise, we'll handle them together. But Karen, you have to let them say Shadow." The room fell silent, except for the distant hum of the rescue team's generators. Karen looked around at her neighbors, people she'd cited, argued with, and tried to control for over a decade. People who were now offering to shoulder the consequences of her decision. "The rules exist for a reason," she whispered, but the words felt hollow. "Some rules do," Mr. Peterson said gruffly. "But some rules just exist because we're afraid of what happens without them." Karen walked to the window and stared down at the well. The floodlights cast harsh shadows, but she could see Dr. Vance checking her equipment, preparing for what might be a final rescue attempt. At 12:23 am, Karen Whitmore made the longest walk of her life, from her front door to the community well. "Dr. Vance," she called out. The rescue team turned, surprised. You have my permission to proceed. On behalf of the Willowbrook Estates, away. The next 3 hours blurred together. Harnesses and ropes, specialized equipment lowered into the well, careful coordination between veterinarians and rescue specialists. Karen found herself holding flashlights, fetching water, doing whatever small tasks would help. At 3:47 a.m., Shadow emerged from the well, unconscious but breathing, cradled in a rescue harness. The small crowd that had remained cheered softly, but Karen barely heard them. She was staring at the Leopard's face, peaceful now in Dr. Vance's care. She'll make it, Dr. Vance said, looking directly at Karen. Thanks to you. But as the rescue van drove away into the pre-dawn darkness, Karen noticed something that made her blood run cold. In all the chaos, the commotion, the media attention, she'd failed to notice the black sedan parked across the street. The one with government plates. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. Mrs. Whitmore, this is Agent Rodriguez from Fish and Wildlife Service. We need to talk about how an endangered Amur leopard ended up in your community well, and why our tracking color went dark in your neighborhood 3 days ago. Karen's hand trembled as she hung up. The rescued leopard wasn't just any leopard. It was a federally protected animal that had somehow escaped from somewhere official. And now she was the HOA president who'd nearly let it die on live television. As the sun rose over Willowbrook Estates, Karen realized her real problems were just beginning. The question wasn't just how Shadow had gotten into her well, it was who had put her there and why.